look at that. We're on the internet again, folks.
Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Hey.
Right, so welcome to the Animal Rights Show. And were you going to say something now?
I was going to say, or the Brian Show.
Oh, yeah, the Brian Show. yeah, we've got to call it the Brian Show from now on. And
I was just checking where we were.
as you can see, Brian has a special guest today, our guest panelist here, Richard Deboo. And so it says here on my screen, Richard Deboo is a writer and performer of poetry and prose, and the author of 2 vegan animal rights books, The Meat Delusion and Who Speaks for Earthlings. A well-established public and school speaker on all vegan issues, and an ex-politician who twice stood for parliamentary election in Britain. I don't say the UK because I got told off once years ago.
Okay.
It's not a kingdom and it's not united, so that's what. Richard's advocacy is focused on evidence-based education, communicating the essential scientific and moral truths of the vegan philosophy. So that's your man. And welcome along, Richard. It's good to see you. And welcome also everybody in the chat. Do you want to say a few hellos, everyone?
Shall I say hellos? So we have, who we got? We've got Dave, who was waiting for Brian very, very early on. So he's currently having a little nap here, Dave, at the minute. So he might make an appearance later if he feels like it, of course. We got Ronnie Lee. Hey, Ronnie, how you doing? We've got Paul. How you doing, Paul? And we've got Amber. Hey, Amber, and lovely Deb. And we've got Philip from GMT-5 in New York, having his lunch. And then we've got, I think that might be everyone so far. Say hello if you're here in the chat.
Did you say New York in that way that
New
they
York.
Do? So here we go. So it's the Brian Show, folks. I was a bit worried that I might have typed that wrong and it'd be the Brain Show. Yeah. Which we might really not be able to live up to, but you never know. But anyway, welcome along. We're going to talk about putting other animals into politics. Is it a good idea? Is it not? Is it time to do it? And in what circumstance? And Richard is kind of uniquely placed to answer that question or to speak on it in the sense that you've stood for Parliament, Richard, a couple of times on what you might call the animal ticket, right? And so, but before we delve into that, I wanted to go back to the Meat Delusion. And was that kind of prompted by the God delusion? Was that the case?
It was indeed, absolutely. Yeah, I'd read that book a couple of years earlier and found that very interesting in the way that it articulated a view of how that religious dogma had so dominated society for so very, very long, and yet was not evidence-based in terms of like the scientific practicalities of what was being described. So when it came to my first book, The Meat Delusion, which is a distillation of my vegan philosophy, I considered the idea of the meat delusion as being analogous to religious dogma in the sense that we have philosophies or ideas being articulated, such as that we must have meat, we are meant to have meat, we need to have meat and dairy and so on in our diets. So from the food perspective, or from, in terms of like medical research and knowledge, we must test on animals, otherwise the research is not valid. There are all these ideas out there that I thought, this is not predicated upon anything that is validated by science in any way whatsoever. And it struck me the more that I looked into it, that what we have here in terms of the general human society use of non-human animals in our world is a blatant lie. The things that we are told are normal and natural and reasonable or humane or sensible or worthy, none of it can be regarded as being true if we look at it from an evidence-based perspective. If we look at it in terms of what we know about the lives of non-human animals, the complexity of their psychological and emotional lives, the reality of their ability to experience physical suffering, And in terms of our own physiology and what diet may be the most natural one for our kind, and all these different things, it's basically a complete and utter lie. And yet it seems to me that rather like those religious dogmas which have so dominated societies across the globe for so long, the meat delusion is probably the most successful lie in all of human history. It is ubiquitous in pretty much every culture, in every country, across pretty much every year of human existence. And there's been a perception amongst the great majority of human animals that they can use, and what I mean by use is exploit and take for our own advantage the lives of non-human animals just because we think we're superior to them. We think we're better than them. We think that they are lesser than us, therefore. And we think that it is completely reasonable and right for us to do as we wish to those other species with whom we share this world. And so that was why I thought I could use the phrase, the meat delusion, to describe this incredibly successful lie, which we still, even now in the 21st century of Western so-called civilization, I'm not sure we really live up to the ideals of what a civilization ought to be, but it is absolutely ubiquitous. It is far harder to avoid the meat delusion than it is to participate in it, because it's literally everywhere.
Yeah, well, we all know that.
Well said, Richard. You should take up public speaking. You know that.
Yeah, you might be quite good at it, actually. Yeah, you might do that.
I'll give it a go.
We all know that Gandhi joke, don't we, about getting off the plane and somebody said, "Well, what do you think about Western civilization?" And he said, "I think it'd be a good idea."
Yeah, indeed. I'm still waiting as well. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
I'm just saying hello to Jennifer and Joanna, little latecomers. Hey there.
I know, part-timers again, part-timers. So politics, people, do we think that, as I put it on Facebook, really, I said, in a very deeply species society, does kind of putting other animals into politics kind of work or even make sense at this stage? I've always been a little bit, well, quite opposed to it, in the sense that I tend to think we need cultural change first, in order for the legislation that we're trying to affect is not so deeply speciesist. Because if we're asking a deeply speciesist legislature, I can never say that word, to do something, it's very difficult to get them to do what we want. They usually water it down, as in the hunting ban and all those kind of things. If it's something like fur farm bans, they usually compensate the fur farmers for millions, rather than just seeing them as what we would see them as kind of animal users, and therefore, not legit kind of thing. So you've given it a shot, as it were, a couple of times, Richard. So did you feel as though, were you too early, or was that, a good time, and should it be done again? What do you think?
I think in the UK, Britain, where I did that, I think we perhaps were just a little bit too early for where politics was at that time. This is like the late noughties. So we started off in 2008 in London, and I think because we hit just where the financial crash was becoming like the dominant factor, and I think we struggled a little bit to be able to get our message across when so many people were experiencing very profound financial hardship, and they saw other issues as being of far more personal, direct significance than these bigger picture issues about how society is structured and how we're supposed to regard non-human animals in society, and what role we should have in terms of how we look after them from a political and, yes, a legislative point of view. And that was, we tried to do it at that time. You never know in advance whether you've got the right time or not. It's only with hindsight that you probably look back and you think, maybe if the financial crash hadn't have happened, maybe a few things might have been a little bit easier. If a lot of the British community were not going through a significant financial recession at exactly the same time that we were coming out with these very, very grand ideas about a wholesale restructuring of society, and including lots of non-human animals in our community as well. But we did it because of the earlier success of the Party van de Dieren, the Party for the Animals in the Netherlands, under Marianne Thieme in the early noughties, where they had been electorally successful and they'd achieved representation in the Senate, and they were able to speak in the legislature and get their point of view across and raise these really important animal rights-based issues at the heart of the lawmaking place in that country. And so one of so the person I was working in, I'll say, just go back a little bit. So over in the Netherlands, one of those who was helping out with that party was a lady called Deboo, no relation to myself, Richard Deboo, although maybe to go back 300 years ago, maybe there is a connection. But she had been in the Netherlands, she had seen the success of that. She then moved over to the UK, and having seen that success, she thought, well, why can't we replicate that success here? And that's exactly what political movements should do. You know, you see a movement being successful in one place, well, you want to do the same elsewhere as well. So we started, and so her and I, we established this political party called Animals Count. And so we modeled it on the Party for the Animals in the Netherlands. And what we wanted to do was, from the perspective of the UK government, try and replicate the success that had been apparent in the Netherlands at that time. There are a number of challenges that we faced in trying to do that in the UK that perhaps weren't also present in the Netherlands, given the differences between the political systems in the Netherlands, which is much more coalition based. It's much more about proportional representation in terms of the votes counting, whereas here in the UK we've got a first past the post system, and dominated by two parties only, where at that time we had never had, or certainly in living memory, not had a coalition government. So it's not something that, so small party representation wasn't something that had ever really been tried before in UK politics, whereas that was a natural thing in the Netherlands. So it probably wasn't a surprise that a party like the Party for the Animals could have success there, but in the UK, that was a different order of magnitude of difficulty.
Were you taking
Richard, how do you? We're all really excited, like little excited.
Yeah, alphabetical order.
Nella, you go first.
I was going to ask, do you feel that is there any advantage in having vegan politicians in different parties, or in order to achieve something, or to attempt to achieve something, they need to be organized under a vegan party, a party with a very clear purpose in relation to animals, to other animals?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think, again, it probably, to a degree, and I can only speak knowledgeably or best about the UK system, because that's where I was and that's the system that I was engaged with. I think, again, probably because of how that is set up, I think it's probably more realistic to have vegan advocates within the major parties rather than perhaps a sole representative from a very much smaller party. I mean, it's analogously, if we think of Caroline Lucas for the Green Party, who's been the sole MP for the Greens in the UK for best part of a decade now, you know, she's been brilliantly successful in terms of getting that representation. And she is fantastically hardworking in the UK Parliament. And she raises her voice on a very regular basis and speaks in debates and raises bills and does her absolute level best to make sure that green issues are heard from the perspective of the Green Party. But it's tough if you're the only one, you know, given the nature again of UK politics, where Labour and Conservatives absolutely dominate. And certainly what we've seen more recently in the last couple of UK general elections, 2017, 2019, is that because the nature of how that can work is one party can literally ride roughshod over any other voices, because you can end up with, as the Conservative Party currently do, a substantial majority where you can completely disregard other voices, because what are they going to do? There aren't enough other people to be able to stop that party from being able to do what they want. In a sense, it's like an elective dictatorship, where that single party can be so all-powerful that getting your voice across can be so incredibly hard if you're not in that party. So I think for the UK particularly, without this history of coalition or representation of those other voices, I think having tried to be one of those other voices, I think in the UK it's probably more effective to have cross-party representation from within those much larger parties, to try and leverage their influence over their own executives, to get them to take these animal issues much more seriously.
Good answer. We've lost one of our team. We've lost Roger, and so
I've annoyed him already.
who actually that's it, sad enough. So we can't bring up our comments because Roger's the one who brings up the comments as well. But someone was saying, I think it's I don't know if it's Jem, which is the French pronunciation, or Jamie Rochelle. I don't know if you recognise that name. Richard, what a pleasant surprise to see Richie on here. They're just saying what a pleasant surprise. But my question was going to be, and this will do an alphabetical order. I'm jumping ahead of you, Roger, if you can still hear me. I was going to ask in terms of like the process of how do you actually go about setting up a political party like that? What was the kind of process that was involved, and then how did you start to make the impact with that party? Would you just give me a little bit of an idea, because I'm fascinated by that?
Yeah, sure. And to be honest, setting up a political party is certainly in the UK, is an incredibly easy thing to do. Anybody can do it, which is why you do sometimes have some more unusual candidates when we have a general election in various constituencies, because the actual process is really straightforward. You just register yourself with the Electoral Commission, you pay your little fee, and it's not it's only a couple of £100, as I recall, to do that. And you put together your principles of what your party is and what they're trying to achieve, and you agree to abide by the rules of the electoral process, and that's as far as it goes. It's an incredibly simple thing to do, to set up your own political party. In a sense, that's the easy bit. The hard bit then is like what you're actually going to do with it. Once you are now a small political party, how are you going to like raise funds? And how are you going to achieve any kind of prominence in your, whether it's a local community or whether you're trying to achieve national prominence, how are you going to achieve that? And so it's a matter of like talking to people, setting up events, and we set up various fundraising events, and we went along to various other vegan events that were taking place anyway, and then made ourselves visible and known and talked to others. We started engaging with as many people as we could. We put information out there on what was at the time quite novel social media, in terms of like trying to get our name out there, and it was just about trying to be as visible as you could, and talking to like-minded people, trying to get volunteers and helpers to support you in going around various places or putting leaflets together, trying to get some help with putting some documentation together, and trying to organize events and having speaking events. So I spoke at quite a number of national vegan events that were going to take place anyway. So it's a good opportunity then to start using the name. And that's what you start doing. It's like in any kind of PRing, if you like, you start using the name. So every time you talk, you mention animals count, as we did. So it's all about getting the brand out there, if you like. So, but that's the hard work. Setting up the political party is really easy, but then trying to find those like-minded people who are willing to give up time and effort to help you with, giving up time to like pound the streets and help with setting up, or writing leaflets and documentation and printing things, and trying to work out how we want to work together and what we're going to do, and establishing committees and things like that. That's one of the tougher things, because as a very small political party, the one thing that was almost always absent was money. And sadly, and like a lot of places, particularly the UK and particularly the US, as we know, money is politics, and politics is money. And, if we'd have had a very fabulously wealthy private benefactor who could have like donated, 20 or 30 million to us, potentially we could have achieved the same kind of thing which the UK Independence Party did in the early part of the second decade of of this century with their ideas about Europe and all this kind of thing. They were a tiny political party until somebody bankrolled to the tune of tens of millions of pounds. And all of a sudden, UK Independence Party was absolutely everywhere for a few years because money makes all the difference. You get access to so many more places, you get access to so many more people, and you can start to advertise in so many more places. You can make yourself much more visible publicly to so many more people. Whereas we didn't have hardly any money. We would do little fundraising events. We might raise £1,000 here or £1,000 there. But politics doesn't come cheap. And, when we were running our first campaigns, and the very first one was when Yasmine stood in a local election in London, 2008. Even just running a small campaign that's localized to a single constituency in London can cost many, many hundreds of pounds just to get leaflets printed or to be able to get representation in certain places or to get an advert on the radio and things like that, so that people know you're even there, that you're present. Everything costs money to do it. And that was one of our biggest challenges, was always trying to raise sufficient funds to do it. If we could have found a very wealthy vegan who would have been happy to hand over 20, who knows what could have happened? You never know.
See, this is where Dave might come in when his Bitcoin comes in. I suppose because we often talk about the kind of difficulties of capitalism in terms of like the vegan philosophy and all that stuff, but in a way, if you're taking that into the political sphere, there's no avoiding it. You're going to be tied up and intertwined with capitalism unavoidably then, really.
Very much so. And when we stood in the UK general election of 2010, and I was the candidate in the Islington South and Finsbury constituency in London, I mean, that we had a war chest for that campaign of about £15,000, and it went very quickly. And we were able to produce leaflets so that everybody got a mail shot in the whole constituency, and that's great. Everybody gets to see it. We were able to use some of the funds to travel around and be visible at hustings events and things like that. But in terms of things like billboards and stuff and things like that, which other parties would line the streets with posters everywhere, we had one billboard in one little street for the whole time, and that was there for 2 weeks, and that cost us £800 to have one billboard for a fortnight, and that was all we could afford to do. If you think if you have £50,000 to spend on billboards, well, you can have 500 billboards. Then you can do it. Just everything becomes easier with money. So you're right; it becomes unavoidable to participate in a system that you don't particularly like. You're not particularly enamored of the way that capitalism works and the way that money can influence what political choices people get to have and what voices are able to be effectively heard in society. But it's sadly how that system works. And that was always a real struggle for us, to have sufficient funds, because we knew we had good things to say. 11 years later, I will absolutely stand by every word we put in our manifesto for 2010. I was a good manifesto. I liked that one, and I stand by it now. So we had good things to say, and when people did get to hear us, when I'd be at hustings events and I'd be there with the incumbent MP, who was and continued to be Emily Thornberry, the Labour politician, and you've got her there, and you've got representatives from the Conservative Party, Liberal Democrats, and so on, UKIP and others. I would have, at least at that time, I had an opportunity, a platform that I could talk about the things that were important to us and what we thought was important to other people. And when others did get to hear it, they really liked it. They really enjoyed hearing this alternative view of how politics can be. Because one of our taglines was, another politics is possible. It's not about greed. It's not about self-interest. It's not just about us. It's about community. It's about sharing. It's about recognizing the needs of everyone in society. And that's not only humans, but non-humans as well. And we have a really positive, energizing message. And when people got the chance to hear it, we had some really positive feedback about that. And it forced and challenged those larger parties to have a view about the things I was talking about. Because at the hustings event, I asked a question about what I stood for, and I answered it, and I gave my policy position. And then quite correctly, the chair would then turn to the other party and say, well, what's your view on this then? Whether it's like the climate emergency or animal farming or the emergence. I was talking even back then about the emergence of pandemic disease because of, you know, animal farming and the exploitation and destruction of the natural environment and so on. And it compelled them to have a view about those things. More often than not, they didn't have a view because they don't think about those things at all. They didn't have a policy position. So
how difficult or easy was to phrase this message in a way that represented your beliefs, but and didn't play into welfarism in a system that understands only welfare and not rights?
That's a very good question, and we were quite deliberately careful in our manifesto and in our general conversations to be cautious in the language that we use. We knew, not because it's not right to be absolutely abolitionist in animal rights. We as a party were, and we as individuals who are putting those words together, that was absolutely our philosophy. But we knew that if we didn't want to present in a way that others would perceive as strident or as aggressive, or in a way that was going to just make them react really negatively. And we have to remember that going back to 2008, 2009, 2010, at that period, this was almost like a different world compared to today in terms of the use of the word vegan, for example. Back then, you know, and I know Roger's talked about this a lot, certainly a number of years ago, that vegan isn't a scare word. But if you go back 10 or 15 years, it kind of was a scare word because you didn't see it on consumer products. Nobody was talking about it on television adverts. Nobody mentioned it. They mention it now because it's like a really positive consumer thing and they can make money out of it. But you go back to 2009, 2010, it almost was like a scare word. So if we knew that if we presented as being what others would see as hardline and vegan and animal rightsy, then that was probably going to do us and our cause a disservice. Not because we were wrong to be animal rights, but because at that time it was the political landscape. And as I say, when we were standing in the elections that we were, it was a really difficult time for a lot of people anyway, in terms of the recession, in terms of the fact that people were losing their homes, they were losing their jobs, their immediate interests were elsewhere. So we wanted to be careful in how we phrased our policies. And we chose, and it was quite correct that we did do, we had, and we needed to have policies on housing as well, and on education, and on transport, and on the military, and what, you know, the UK should be doing in terms of defence and so on. We didn't just want to present as a party that is only, quote marks, interested in animal rights, but it's everyone in the community, it's all of us, it's everyone together, whether we're human animals or non-human animals. So we did have policies on all those other issues as well that we could talk about to people, because we knew that was where they were going to have their immediate focus anyway. But the majority of our manifesto absolutely was dedicated to issues surrounding the use of animals in society. But we were cautious and careful about how we phrase things. Yeah. Would I do that absolutely in the same way today? Probably not, no, because I think society has actually moved on a bit since then. And I think we're in a different political landscape now. And I think we could be clearer in what our ultimate philosophy and our ultimate aims are if we were to try and present that same thing again.
It's really interesting how we end up having to be strategic. And actually, Ronnie mentioned something which I can't bring up on screen. Sorry, folks. But Ronnie says, I'm a Green Party member, but I voted Labour at the last election because I felt they had the better chance of unseating the Tories. And that's what we're forced to do under the first past the post system. And it's true that sometimes you have to kind of almost forget what your values are and who you would want to vote for and vote strategically because of that. Like when you're saying that ability to unseat, someone wouldn't have a chance if they don't get any votes, whereas vote Labour and you might have a chance. And it seems like as vegans and animal rights activists, we're always having to do that. We're always having to play within the system, within the kind of welfarist system, within speciesism. We're always having to kind of look at what the landscape is and adapt our methods and outreach for that particular landscape at the time, and yet you always feel like you're selling out, or that you're undermining your true values. I don't know, did you ever feel like that when you were kind of talking to people and when you were in the party?
Yeah, absolutely. And Ronnie mentions the Green Party there. I mean, not unreasonably, when we first made our presence felt in England as Animals Count, an explicitly animal protection party, the Greens were, the executive were quite concerned about whether or not we were potentially going to steal votes from them. And, you know, in a first past the post system, every vote can potentially count. And you think, whoa, I mean, you know, you come along, you know, we're still trying to like get somewhere. We want to achieve our representation. And now you come along and you start taking votes away from us as well. So we had a number of conversations between ourselves and the executive of the Green Party to come to, as best we could, an understanding about where we would stand as candidates and where they would stand as candidates, because we essentially didn't want to get in each other's way. And it was about that kind of strategic thinking, is that, you don't, you know, I didn't want to stand in a constituency where I'd be essentially pulling votes away from somebody who, if they could have had the chance to succeed, and I've caused them to fail to succeed and electoral representation, I'd feel pretty awful about that. I wouldn't have wanted that, and I'm sure that, you know, likewise they wouldn't have wanted to do that to us either. So you do have to think strategically about that. And yes, in those general conversations that you're having with people on the doorstep, again, a lot of the times you represent, you say we're here, we're Animals Count, and this is the, you know, we're here to support everyone in society. You know, we want to think about how we look after other animals. We try to avoid using words like welfare, because that's got a very specific meaning that we did want to try and avoid if we at all could, because we didn't want to be a welfare party at that time. We were Animals Count, and we were abolitionist, we were rights-based people. But we talk about like the care of animals, or how we can better, or how we can change farming systems and so on, how we can improve things in terms of the caring for the environment. But you also then talk about housing and what's it like for the people here. You know, you're in Islington South, what's the housing situation like? Because you want people to know or to feel that you are on their side with the issues that are really important to them as well in that way. And that they're not just seeing me as exclusively only for the animals in that sense. Because, you've got to think strategically here. You think if you just present somebody on the doorstep as only being for the animals, you've probably lost a vote that you might have otherwise got if you talked about those other issues.
So when you step down,
so there's somebody's at the door with a parcel, but I'm going to tell him just to leave it there. Sorry. They deliver at all times of the day and night now.
They do, don't they? Like 24 hours. You can go and get your parcel if you want me to.
Yes, absolutely.
Sorry.
So the party was rebranded in a way. It changed name, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
So what happened then? Votes-wise, what happened in the last 10 years?
Indeed. So we were there up until Yasmin and I, as the leader and deputy leader, respectively, through those early years. And after the UK general election, which of course we didn't win in our constituency, I mean, we knew that we're certainly not going to unseat somebody who was as locally popular as Emily Thornberry and Labour at that time. But what we wanted to do was use our voice. And I do believe we got heard. We were represented on national television and in the national press. We had interviews in various places. We got our mail shots out to thousands and thousands of people. We were visible and we got seen. And we did feel we got our point across as best we could have done. But we did also feel then at the end of 2010, after we'd taken the party through 3 elections at that point, the London election of 2008, the European elections of 2009, and then the general election of 2010, that we had essentially taken it as far as we could have done. And it was probably time for a fresh way of thinking. And so we both stepped away from our leadership positions and allowed others then to step forward and to have a rethink about what the direction they wanted to take the party in. And that then there became absolutely their baby, if you like, at that point. You know, that was for them to decide then how they wanted to try and achieve more representation, or try to get a better performance in the polls, or whatever they wanted to do in terms of how they wanted to run that party. So we did as much as we thought we could have done and had taken it as far as we could. And then we allowed others to step in and decide the future direction for that party. So Animals Count stopped being Animals Count and then became the Animal Welfare Party. And it's still there now after another 11 years. So it's continued to have candidates standing in various elections, as I understand it. I don't always get the opportunity to look as closely as I was when I was the deputy leader, and I needed to take a very close look at what we were doing. So I don't always get the chance to look as closely as I would like to sometimes at exactly every result, but they still stand in various elections and they present their manifestos and they participate in various events, such as climate emergency events on the streets of London and protests. And I know they speak at a whole range of different events. But I think what we've found generally, and this is what we were able to determine as well by an examination of the data, because when you finish your elections, you get like really detailed results back from the Electoral Commission, exactly where your votes that cast that were for you, exactly where they were. So you can do some really good data and analytics. So what we found that in all of the elections we stand, we get round about 1.5 to 2% of the votes in that area, irrespective of the size of the electorate for that particular election. And what I think we've seen subsequent to that is that an explicitly animal focused party is always going to get that round about 1.5 to 2% of the votes wherever they have a candidate. And there may be individual fluctuations. So it may pop up to like 3.5% in some, or maybe dip a little in others. But I think if you broaden it out over the average, there tend to be, in any election where there's an animal focused candidate, you're always going to get round about 1.5 to 2% of the votes. You may get a little bit more, may get a little bit less, but it always seems to be there's those people who are always going to vote for an animal candidate if they see them represented on the ballot paper. And one of the interesting things we found from the European elections of 2009 is that we tried really hard to get ourselves out there, to be visible to the people. And we were standing in the East of England constituency. And these are big constituencies for the European elections, of course. So this is like the whole of the East of England where we're represented as candidates. So we had ourselves a camper van and we just drove everywhere. And in the last week and a half, I think we must have covered 1,500 miles. We'd turn up in different places. We'd hand out leaflets and T-shirts and things. We'd have all kinds of little rosettes and stuff we could give to people. We'd be standing on the streets. We'd talk and we'd talk and we'd talk. Then we'd drive on somewhere else and we'd do the same thing. And we just did that day after day. We just put ourselves out there. And then when we did the data analytics and we saw where the votes were cast for us as candidates, there was no difference in the percentage between those places we had physically visited and those other places where they'd simply had a mail shop. So it's like we could have basically stayed at home with our feet up and watched television.
Oh,
and we probably
could watch Netflix with a packet of crisps. Perfect.
Yeah. So, because it seems like there's always going to be that core group of voters. If they see an animal candidate on the ballot paper, they're going to put their little X. And you're going to get them.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter whether you've turned up and knocked on their door or seen them on the street. Maybe you'll get a 1 or 2, but across the whole of the electorate, across the whole percentages, it seems to make almost minimal difference. Or it certainly did to us at that time. That it's just, there's that core of people.
Yeah. Deb's got a question in the chat, actually. So Deb says, Richard, do you think it's vital to get a critical mass of voters interested in animal rights issues before politicians will listen and act on these issues?
It's a really good question. And I think that my view now is probably yes. And again, that's why I'd go back to saying that I think certainly in the UK, it's more effective to lobby and leverage our influence on individual, hopefully already vegan or interested in animal rights politicians in the larger parties. Because yes, I think what we do need to do is have more of a significant change in society generally before our legislature are going to take these issues explicitly seriously. Again, I'll probably fall back again on that idea of being the sole voice in a parliament if you're the only one saying those things from an animal-specific party. If you're on your own in the UK Parliament, it can be a really lonely place. Whereas I think we know we have got vegans in the Conservative Party, there's vegans in the Labour Party, there are going to be vegans in the Liberal Democrats. If we can get all of and use our influence against all of those, and they can come together as a larger group of people, and they can collectively present ideas that are animal rights focused or concerned with the rights of our non-human animal friends, then that's probably more effective than being a sole voice from an animal focused party. But absolutely, I think that is right. It's probably what we need to see is more happening in society generally, which is why now I am an ex-politician. I think that I'm now an independent animal activist. I do my speaking and my talking and schools, education and so on. My advocacy is all about sharing the importance of switching to a vegan world, which is achievable and practical and sensible for us to do, as we know, but trying to get out there to as many people as possible, and trying to switch as many people as possible onto these ideas. And yes, creating that groundswell of an understanding of the importance of veganism and the importance of animal rights, so that does ensure that our legislature takes those kinds of ideas seriously. I think it is correct that the best influence comes from us, the people, onto our representative in Parliament. And it's down to, yes, trying to create that critical mass if we possibly can.
The politicians that are already vegan or plant-based, do you feel that they have some kind of saying in issues like subsidies when they are discussed? I mean, even if they cannot present an animal liberation position, can they affect?
I'd like to hope that they do, but I worry sometimes that it just gets lost in the bigger picture of the major policy issues of the day. There is in the UK Parliament something called the All-Party Group for Animal Welfare, and welfare is about as far as they're going to go in terms of that. And because it is all-party, it is representatives from all of the parties that have representatives in the UK Parliament, and they put forward policy ideas, and they put forward bills, and they discuss these issues, and people can put forward they can speak in debates and present these ideas in Parliament. But yeah, my concern is there's still not probably enough of them, certainly not yet, to really influence those who are ultimately responsible for policy. You know, I certainly, as backbenchers, I just don't think there's a sufficient number that they've got the power to influence the executive. And I don't think across the floor there's yet enough of them who are taking those ideas seriously enough, which they should be, but they're not, taking those ideas seriously enough so that if there is a conversation about the pandemic, for example, then people talk about, the importance of, the significance of animal farming and the destruction of the environment in causing those pandemics and those things to happen. If there's a discussion about the climate emergency, we'll talk about the fact that it's animal farming that is a major, major contributor to that whole problem, and that the switch to a plant-based diet is absolutely critical, as the United Nations have been calling for now for the best part of 15 years. It's just not being heard in debates. And even though there may be some people there who are, yes, plant-based or would regard themselves to a degree as vegan, I think when it comes down to the actually standing up and talking about these things, they're not talking about it. They'll talk about fossil fuel companies. They'll talk about BP and all that kind of thing, and they'll talk about fuel, and they'll talk about electric cars and electric car charge points and that kind of thing. But when it comes to the climate emergency at the moment, who is actually mentioning animal farming? It's just not happening.
Yeah.
They're just not doing it.
No one. Yeah. No.
Even though it is absolutely vital to it. It's critical.
Yeah.
Yes, but if they're heavily dependent on money, they get the money from those that will get offended by this.
Yeah, and unfortunately we do slip back again into what we were talking about earlier, that politics is essentially money. You know, those, as we've seen recently with the release of things like the Panama Papers and so on and so forth, that those with cash get access. With cash, you get access to the Prime Minister, to the Chancellor, to those who are the absolute decision makers in the UK Parliament. And those, but who are they listening to? Whose ideas do they hear? Only those who have an explicit interest in maintaining the precise status quo, which has led us into an absolutely disastrous place. But the only voices that the people at the top are hearing, the top of their decision-making political process, are those who want it to stay exactly the same.
Yeah, the people with vested interests. And so it seems like, and Ronnie makes a point as well, very much that the problem with the major parties is their fundamental ideologies do not lend themselves to animal liberation, e.g. their support for neoliberalism. And so, Richard, I wonder, because it seems to be that we're saying at the moment, it seems quite almost maybe too soon for for animal rights to make any real headway in politics, because we are in such a speciesist society and our system, it's systemic and ubiquitous. But I just wonder what you might think about how do we, should we, and if we should, how do we sow the seeds in the political arena and lay foundations simultaneous to vegan education, so that maybe when things do shift, when maybe we do get more of a critical mass, that we're not kind of left adrift, you know what I mean? That we have got foundations laid in order to then push things forward. What kind of things do you think we might be able to do there?
It's a very important point, and a lot of that, for me, my personal perspective is that a lot of it is, and you use the word education, and that is why I've focused a lot of my advocacy over the years on the next generation coming up. You know, I've spoken in hundreds of schools over the years on these animal rights issues, and I've found literally every single occasion that they are so open to new ideas, and they are so open to listening and learning about these kinds of issues from an explicitly animal rights perspective, and wanting to take that on and wanting to take it forward. You know, so I've spoken in schools and colleges and at youth groups and other locations, and every single time they are so open to learning and knowing in a way that I found that my own generation was less willing to be open and willing to listen and learn and change and adapt. So I do vest a lot of hope, sorry young people, but I vest a lot of hope in the next generation that they are, and we know that some of them, they are taking these ideas seriously. They know how important the environment is, but once they can see the connection between the climate emergency and that bigger picture of, well, that's happening because we're not vegan. We've only destroyed the environment, and we only do those things to the environment because we are not respecting those other lives. If you're vegan and you respect those other lives, then you don't empty the oceans of fishes. Then you don't pull down the rainforest to make way for soya, for feeding beef cows, so-called, for yet another beef burger. You're not doing all that stuff. You don't do any of it. You look after the planet in a much better way. So once they see that connection, there's a little light bulb that goes on, and they think, that's the foundational thing. The treatment of non-human animals comes first. Your compassion and consideration for those other lives then feeds into knowing that that just makes you look after the environment by default. And well, you're going to live in society. The young folks are going to own the world. They will inherit the earth. But what are they going to inherit? Well, my generation hasn't done anything very nice for them at all. But my hope is that by talking to them, by giving them the benefit of what we understand as the fundamental solution to all of the ills that we face in society, which is switching to a vegan world of kindness and compassion and love for all, and taking everybody's needs into account, that solution is possible and practical, and I want them to take it on. I think it is absolutely too late for my generation. I've given up on them, actually. I mean, they just...
We've seen the numbers of vegans rise, but what about the numbers of voters for the animal parties?
Well, they don't seem to be rising yet, and this is the thing. And I don't know. I mean, you'll probably have more information about the polls and the number of vegans and things, how many of those vegans do we think are animal rights based abolitionist vegans versus I eat vegan pizzas for dinner now, rather than, but are they active? Are they motivated towards wanting to change the world into a better place for everyone? Do they help out at sanctuaries? Do they support, people in other countries and helping out in terms of the wildlife and looking after all of those elsewhere? What are these people doing that in addition to saying that they're vegan, or are they only having the plant-based products?
It seems that a large number of vegans perceives the vegan philosophy and ideology as non-political, and mainly as a lifestyle. So I'm wondering, when these people vote, even if there is a representative of the Animal Party, will they go for that, or they think that these things too are irrelevant?
Yeah, it's a very good question. And I think what we've got to overcome first and foremost is what your starting point there was, that virtually very few people regard veganism as political. For me, and it has always been the case, veganism is politics, because for me veganism is about how society is structured and how do we interact with each other. Society is community, and community is how we interact with each other. Well, each other includes everyone who lives on planet Earth. So veganism for me, fundamentally, first and foremost, is political. It is politics. And I do wish that other vegan advocates would be more explicit about that as well. Because I think you're right. I think we've got a definition problem to overcome, which is that people see it either as like a consumer product thing. It's what they see on packets of shampoo or pizzas or whatever it might be. Or it's a lifestyle thing. It's about, I'm super healthy. I go for a run and I eat all my, nuts and seeds and things like that. So it's a lifestyle thing. And for some people, it's an ethical thing. And absolutely, it's ethical. Of course it is. It's about not wanting those appalling things to happen in the slaughterhouses or the research laboratories or the zoos or wherever. But bringing all of that together, it's ultimately politics. It's how we interact. It's how we live and share the space that we have in this planet, and how we do that. So for me, it's political. And I think we need to make that point much more explicit, because I don't think it's explicit enough. And yes, I think you're absolutely right there. When it comes down to politics at election time and people are seeing the names written down, how many people really see an animal thing as being relevantly political to them, in terms of how the planet gets looked after, in terms of how their society is structured, in terms of things like housing and community and education, and all those different things that feed into a broad philosophy of politics and how life is structured. I think we've got a definition of that we need to understand.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a few really good comments coming in. Laura says, I suspect that vegans who are in it for themselves aren't going to be politically active on the issue, whereas vegans who are in it for the animals will be more active. And I suppose that's, like we were saying, why have people become vegan? Whether we would call those people who are not vegan for the overarching philosophy of anti-oppression would actually be vegan in our minds is a different thing, isn't it? We would probably think more of those people as plant-based. And then dark compassion. Oh, I like that name.
Yeah, I like that. That's good.
Compassion. We love that.
You know who they are, Wendy? They've been a guest in the show.
Have they?
Yes, it's Nikos from Sweden. Yes.
Hey, Nikos. Oh, I love that name, Nikos. And Nikos, .compassion, says, but political parties who are animal parties have a PR problem. Much of the time, for instance, in Sweden, the political party does not even get 1/10 of vegan votes. So Nikos is saying that it's a PR problem.
Yeah.
As well.
Absolutely. Yeah, I get that. Oh, that is painful. Yeah.
Richard, I've got a question, something that's going on in the movement at the moment. So there's a couple of things that tie in. One, there's the campaign against MBR acres. So free the MBR beagles, Camp Beagle and all of that stuff. And Camp Beagle were up today at Parliament, I believe, campaigning for obviously to raise awareness of MBR acres and the Camp Beagle campaigns, but also to raise support for the EDM 175. Have you heard of the EDM 175? So it's basically a public scientific hearing on animal experiments, and it was tabled in June this year. And basically it's been signed by 83 members. And actually it was really sad because when I looked at supporters, there are 82 supporters, one's been withdrawn, and the one who's been withdrawn is Sir David Anas, who was obviously killed last week. And so David was the only Conservative MP to have supported that EDM, or all the rest are Labour or Scottish National Party or Independents. He's the only Tory to support it, and obviously really, really sad what's happened. But I just wonder with this EDM, I just wonder if this, one, how many supporters will it need to come to the table to have that, to get sort of discussed in Parliament, and then what would the process be from there? Like what could the effect of a discussion about this public scientific hearing on animal experiments, where could that go? Just love your political expertise on that, really.
Yeah, it's a nice way of introducing other ideas into Parliament, because hopefully, I mean, there's no good reason for the Speaker not to choose to give space to that in the House so that it can be tabled for conversation and discussion. Potentially you can attach a vote to it, whether or not it should be taken further forward for further consideration. And ultimately it could end up being a private member's bill, which I think is the most likely outcome, rather than it being something put forward as a paper by the executive itself. It'd be more likely, if there is shown to be some good support in the House, if there's a discussion for the EDM itself, if that seemed to be positively received, then a private member's bill could be put forward and that could include various ideas about what should actually happen in terms of the legislation around animal experimentation. But we'd have to see what that would actually look like at the time if it did get that far. And then potentially, of course, it could be voted into law from that point onwards. It's very rare for a private member's bill to become law. They tend to be an opportunity for members to present their ideas, to give visibility to something that they regard as important, and for the House to take a view, if you like, but then that's it. Then it kind of goes away. It's rare for any of them to receive very widespread, significant House support such that it will achieve that success to become law. But it's one of the opportunities that an individual member of Parliament has. It's one of those few routes that they do have to essentially try to achieve change in legislation themselves, rather than having to wait for the executive to decide what they're going to put forward. But if you were to get a private member's bill that did have really widespread support, then potentially that could compel the executive to think that there's something here that they should be considering and taking seriously. So that there are options there, but my view, I guess, at the moment is that's unlikely given the current Conservative executive under Johnson and co. I'm not hopeful that they would take any interest in anything like this whatsoever at all, given everything that I've ever known from the likes of Johnson, Raab and Patel and all those other horror stories of an executive.
And Priti Patel was actually, she was actually horrified by the undercover footage that came out of one of the laboratories, and which then kind of saw the growing campaign and people getting involved, like it got to the Mirror newspaper and Peter Egan and Ricky Gervais kind of got involved early on and things like that as it started to grow. But since then haven't really heard anything from Priti Patel, surprisingly. So is there anything in terms of this kind of EDM that's only just currently tabled and gaining support from some members? Is there anything that advocates can do to push that along? Is it about raising awareness and getting people on board with it?
Yeah, very much so. I mean, as you've done exactly, anybody can find out who has already signed that motion. So anybody within the UK can have a look to see if their MP has signed it or not. And if they haven't, well, then go and have a word and try and encourage them to do it, lobby them. And that's what they're there for. They are this is how the politics is supposed to work, of course, is that they are there as our representatives in that constituency. So if you see in your constituency that that MP has not signed that EDM, then, well, you need to have a conversation with them and talk to them and lobby them and get others to do the same thing. Get a letter writing campaign going or something like that. Yeah, right. Bombard them with emails, get them to take this seriously and say, look, this is important. This matters to a lot of people in your constituency. We are the ones who vote for you. You are there as our representative. So listen to what we're saying. And that's what people can do to try and get a much larger number of people on that EVM. Lobby your MP if they haven't signed it already. That is one of the powers that we do have. We can at least do that.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate that. So poor Roger, Paul was saying, there
are so many comments. Yeah.
Hello. Getting kicked off his own channel, and the thing is, Nella, me and you, we can't actually close this down, can we? So
no,
it will just continue until Roger closes it down. So just to infinity and beyond.
There's nothing we can do. Yeah,
I know there's nothing we can do, but I'm hoping that that he will be able to do that. Otherwise, it might not save. And then, as Paul Campbell was saying, like, it would be really a real shame because we want people to be able to watch this back. Paul was actually saying this is really worth watching back, especially if Richard does some poetry at the end. I don't know if that's a possibility, Richard.
I haven't got anything in front of me
at
the moment. I haven't even thought. Oops. Yeah.
No, I didn't think either. And you have got some brilliant poems, by the way. I've been reading some of your poems. Very, very moving, very powerful.
Thank you.
Yeah. There's a whole conversation going on all about labour shortage and people's labour, but I haven't really kept the thread of that between Ronnie and a few people there. Have you spotted anything, Nella?
There was a while back a comment by Dave about the Conservatives and the Green votes, and why, in your opinion, they don't act in a way that they would secure them the Green votes.
Why do the Conservatives not act in such a way that they would get the Green vote?
Yeah, and in my opinion, it's not just the Conservatives; it's the big parties everywhere. They don't do enough for the climate emergency.
Indeed, yeah, they pay lip service, to use a cliche, to issues related to the climate emergency, but they don't take it seriously. And I think that largely feeds into what we were talking about 15 minutes or so ago, which is whose voices are they really hearing? Who has access to these people? Well, it's those who are responsible for the climate emergency that they are hearing. And so they're not taking seriously the likes of us or those who are trying to say that there has to be fundamental systemic change, because the people who they have access to our executive are those who want it to stay exactly the same. Those who have been, and we know now, like the release of all these papers again, that certainly the fossil fuel industries, they knew about the climate emergency 40 years ago. They did the science. They knew exactly what their products were doing. And of course, the animal farming industry is exactly the same. They know exactly what they're doing. When they pour all that slurry into the rivers, they know what's happening. When they have all that methane being punched into the atmosphere, they know what's happening. When they burn down their rainforest, they know what's happening. And yet they're the ones who still have access to the politicians because they have the money. And so the politicians are just hearing the voices of those who say, well, all you really need to do is kind of tinker around the edges a little bit, maybe a little bit of a change here, maybe a little bit of a thing there. And then there's all the greenwashing that goes on, the pledges, and, they talk about 2050. We haven't got until 2050. We know this, but that's just it's just a year now that just gets thrown out by everybody. If they want to be seen to be good, they'll just say 2050. Like that gets them off the hook or something, where it makes everything fine that you're doing today, right now. No, it's not right now. And it's not going to be fine next week or next year either. And yet they can just throw out 2050 and apparently that's all okay then. And we know what happens then is we see our politicians doing the same thing. They just repeat the stuff that they hear from those who are just pushing this stuff out the way, who are not interested in systemic change to any meaningful degree. And you see the likes of Greta Thunberg, how frustrated she is, because she has got access to people. You know, she's spoken at the United Nations. She's spoken in the US Congress. She has direct access to these people. And yet she knows that they're just greenwashing her. Oh, they'll applaud her and be very polite. Well, Trump would be, but, you know.
Well, Trump, yeah, unless you're Trump, yeah.
Unless you're Trump, yeah. But, you know, they'll applaud and they'll listen, and then they'll just completely ignore everything she said. And all the things that she says are all evidence-based. They're all science-driven. It's all known to be true that we need to make those systemic changes from today. Actually, 10 years ago. But, okay, that's gone now. But and you can see the frustration from some people who, when you're trying so hard to get people just to listen to what we know to be true, it's just so frustrating. And I think that's why the Conservatives are just paying lip service to it. We've seen that with the hopeless, ramshackle approach to COP26, you know, the climate summit that's taking place in Glasgow next month. It's only a few weeks away. It's just a mess. Still don't know who's turning up and who's not. There seems to be no clear coordination as to like exactly how it's going to be run anyway. They've barely taken any notice of it. And it ought to be the most significant climate moment we've ever had yet, because time is running out. So this should be more important than Paris 2015, more important than Copenhagen a decade ago. And yet our government, it's just not my government, has just not taken any notice of it. Until now, Johnson has started making a few phone calls around the world talking about it a bit. But he's not a detailed man. He doesn't like hard work. He doesn't like work at all anyway. So he's not. And you think it's just the worst possible people to have in government at one of the most critical moments in global human history.
So you're not hopeful for COP26 then, Richard? I take it. No, I'm not hopeful. Whatever this bunch of whatever are in government, to be honest. No, definitely not. Not that the other party would be much better. I don't know. Maybe Ronnie might have something to say about that. But everyone's calling for a marathon session of the AI show. Just keep going. And Paul says, can we extend the show till 8 p.m? I think Brian might have something to say about that. Brian has his injection. Hey, Brian, come and meet Richard. Did you see Brian there, Richard? Oh, he popped in. Just popped in. Come and say hello to Richard.
He likes to pop in towards me at the moment. They're not even in here.
This is Brian. Brian. It's the Brian show now, Brian.
It's your show,
shows his bum.
He has to make an appearance.
It's usually the bum that's the star of the show.
The way it works. We're used to this kind of thing.
Ronnie says, I think I once got arrested by COP26. Yeah, Ronnie, and 25 and 24. Yeah, and Ronnie was saying earlier, the fundamental solution is vegan education. I think Ronnie might be into vegan education. I don't know, just gives me a little soupçon, a little clue that you might be up for vegan education. But I think, it's true.
Entirely.
Richard, if we did get to that point, say we keep going with our vegan education and we get more vegans, we get more activists, we're out in schools, we're out in society, we're getting more of that critical mass. How could that then translate into like the political arena? How would that shift? Where would that shift come? How would it look, do you think?
Well, there would be, there would be new people being candidates at the next election. And some of them would be in those bigger parties. But they would have come from a generation that understands the issues in a way that the current crop and the previous crop of politicians absolutely did not, apart from one or two rare individuals here and there. They either weren't interested or just didn't get it. Whereas if we do the education, which we, I know Ronnie and people like myself, a lot of other really fabulous educators and advocates have been doing this now for a number of years. Those who we've been speaking to 5 years ago, 10 years ago, are now going to university, coming out of university. They'll go into politics themselves. Some of those will want to be politicians. They'll want to be legislators. They're going to want to be lawyers as well. They're going to want to be the people who can make and write the law. They can be those who are responsible for that change. And if they are then standing as candidates for those larger parties, even in a dysfunctional system like the one in the UK, if they're from that generation that understands those issues in that much better way, they're going to know that they can't avoid confronting those issues and raising them and presenting them. And that must then at that point lead to that kind of systemic change that we so badly need. But
does this mean
hope on education and the next generation?
And so when this happens, does it mean that there will be a turn towards the left? I cannot see how the capitalist system can be so much adored and at the same time.
Yeah, I would like to hope so, genuinely. I mean, I've been politically active for way too many years now. It goes back a long time. But in the early years of the century, I had real hopes that in that new dawn of the 21st century, that we were going to see an increase in progressive politics and an expansion of progressive ideas. Sadly, in the last decade, I've seen a regression, certainly in the UK and absolutely in the US as well, where we've seen a dramatic increase in much more populist right-wing thinking, which to me has been an absolute horror story to witness, to see that. And I think certainly some of the blame for that does lie with social media and the coarsening of conversation and the ease with which those who are on the extremes are able to leverage their influence by bombarding people with millions and millions of the most vile memes about other communities, and just in creating this wave of virulent hatred of others again. I thought I'd seen the back of. I was there way back in the day in the UK when we had far right groups like the National Front and the British movement and so on. And I thought we'd seen that off. I thought we'd progressed beyond that. And then in the last few years on social media, certainly with the rise of UKIP again, UK Independence Party, and their outright racist hostility to those who were not of that country, and with Brexit and how that created division between Leavers and Remainers and so on. And you just saw that hardening of attitudes. And then you log on and all of a sudden you're seeing anti-Semitic memes. You're seeing anti-immigrant memes. You're seeing the most abusive, offensive language being used about those who are fleeing war and persecution and violence. And I thought I'd seen that off. And yet it's been right there. And you saw that with, the language that has been used in Parliament, by our elected representatives, when lawyers, who are quite correctly, for example, supporting refugees in getting access to legal help, which they have a right to by international law and international treaties that the UK is signed up to. You then have people like Priti Patel describing those people as activist lawyers. And you see, those legal representatives being described as enemies of the people, judges being described as enemies by some of the newspapers in the UK and by our politicians. And the language that is used is just only creating that hardening of attitudes and hostility. But again, I'm resting my hope on the next generation that we're trying to educate about these kinds of things, that we can have a switch back again, towards a more open and a more decent conversation amongst each other. We certainly need more polite conversation on social media. We just need conversation. Even when we're talking to people who are on a different political part of the spectrum, we can still be polite and courteous, because if otherwise we're not having a conversation, we're just shouting at each other. That's not debate.
Actually, I think tonight on British TV anyway, there's a panorama episode all about social media, something about why do you hate me, and it's all about like the algorithms and how the toxic kind of conversations that go on and perhaps how the social media's algorithms actually promote that, and it'd be really interesting maybe to see that. I think social media has really perpetuated that problem, that polarization, hasn't it, of people and communities and things like that. And I wonder, because you mentioned earlier how you said when you were part of Animals Count, how at the time, with hindsight, you said that really it perhaps wasn't the right time because of like the crash in the market and everything. And I guess now we've just had like, we're in the pandemic, COVID-19 pandemic. And I suppose in a way, when will there ever be a time when humans aren't focused on human issues? There will always be something, I suppose. But I suppose it's shifting the paradigm of and you mentioned it a few times, in how we relate to each other, how we relate to other humans and other non-human animals, and how we relate to each other as communities. And that's what has to change, isn't it? Because otherwise we're always going to be in this kind of neoliberal paradigm of individualism and dog eat dog. That's probably that speciesist. I'll have to find another word for that, dog eat dog. But you know, that very much that selfish attitude and let's all be out for ourselves, and then also that puts the pressure on individuals to make the changes, when in fact really the changes that we have to make are systemic, and we have to work as a collective and like you mentioned earlier, coalitions. We can't do everything, we can't make the change we need individually, we have to work to these collectives. So I guess it's shifting our mindsets as well, shifting the way we look at things and our perspectives on the world.
Yeah, very much so. And it is, even as vegans, even as abolitionist, rights-based vegans ourselves, we do need to be mindful also that we don't silo ourselves. You're absolutely right that we need to engage. We want that education to take place. We want to engage, and we absolutely need to engage with others who are in a completely different political and ethical space. And we need to bring people along with us by showing that positive, energizing message that we have, that this is all about making the world better for everyone. It's about the real leveling up, if you like, not Johnson's complete bastardization of the whole thing and a complete lie, but the real leveling up. And that's what veganism is ultimately all about, is giving everyone the rights to live their lives in a way that meets all of their needs, and sharing that positive message with those who are in a completely different space to us. But it has to be done in a way that is courteous and polite, and it is genuinely about not only speaking but also listening as well, because I feel we can only influence positively if we actually hear what other people are saying. And I've seen too much too recently with social media particularly that there is no listening going on. It's literally people just shouting at each other. And that's not going to take us to the place we need to be. And if we only ever talk to the people who we know already agree with us, that's not going to get us to the place we need to be either.
You're so right. And actually that polarization played out in the tragic circumstances with David Ames. I don't know if I'm pronouncing his name correctly, but Ames last week, didn't it? In terms of how we deal with each other, how we interact with each other, and how we view politicians, how we have this kind of polarization of the parties, but also us and them attitude of the politicians and the constituents, and that played out tragically last week with that with the killing of Sir David. But it's a very complex situation. Ronnie's saying that in the UK, we actually only need about 30% of the electorate to vote for an animal liberationist party in order for that party to form the government.
That's absolutely technically true. Yeah, we have such a weird system. Yeah. I mean, at the moment, the Conservative government is ultimately a minority government in terms of the number of votes cast, but they have a massive 80-seat majority, so they're an elective dictatorship. But he's absolutely right. With that number of votes, you can be the government.
Yeah, and Paul is saying recently in Germany there were big gains for centre-left parties. I understand the Green Party had a significant rise in their vote, and now the third largest party in Germany with about 15% of the vote. So things are shifting in Germany by the sounds of it.
At least because in the rest of Europe, everything is moving to the right. Unfortunately, I don't know why there is this phenomenon right now. Obviously, there are many socio-political reasons, but it happens everywhere. Thankfully not in Germany, apparently.
There are elements I do believe there are elements of hope that are there, and we do have to maintain our hope that things will turn in the direction that we need them to. There are, as we know, so many really good people who get all of this stuff, and they are doing their absolute level best to make the positive changes that we know are necessary. And there's people out there, they work tirelessly to educate as much as they can, to support as much as they can, to speak to as many people as they can. They're doing what they can. And all we can hope is we can continue to do that. We reach more people. They then reach more people. And we do then ultimately get enough who say that enough is enough of the old stuff. And that's got to go.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a new way. Because a new way is going to be the only way. Because otherwise it's game over. And I don't think any of us ultimately want that. I don't think there's lots of people out there amongst the general population who want that. They want things to be better. They want things to be good for themselves and their families and their children and grandchildren. They don't want those who are already born to grow up in a world that's a catastrophic nightmare to endure. They don't want that, but we just need to try and find some way of letting them know that another politics is possible, like we were talking about 10 or so years ago, that it's possible to do things in a different way. It's not even that difficult, but it's getting enough people to understand what is practical and achievable.
Yeah, that's the key, isn't it? And I think people are so, including myself, I'm not immune to this, but I think you get trapped in systems that you can't see another way. You feel like, oh, this is how it is. How do we change it? And you feel kind of trapped, and like you're constantly running up against brick walls, and you don't know how to chip away at those systems. And I suppose many people feel like that. I think a lot of people don't become activists because of that mentality as well. Do they? They think like, oh, I'd like to change things, but what can I do? So therefore they don't do anything. A lot of vegans even, will talk like that. So they don't push for change because it's like, oh, we can't change anything. We're powerless. And I wonder how we can empower ourselves and each other in that way to advocate for those different systems.
I don't know if this applies to Britain, but usually here those taking the streets for in order to protest and change something are the people of the left. So I'm not sure that this veganism across the political spectrum idea is very helpful for activism, because I cannot see the people of the right going against the system. At least those that vote for the right.
Hardening, and an intensification of the current system. Absolutely. No, you're right. Absolutely. It may sound weird to say it, but there are some moderate centre-right people who are pretty intelligent, and they will listen to good evidence-based ideas. And I think we can reach some of them. But you're right, those who are more activist on the right tend to be those who really aren't. In fact, what they do is they use animal rights for their own purposes. And they infiltrate what were otherwise perfectly good, decent, progressive movements or grassroots initiatives. And they twist and corrupt them and use them for their own purposes to just throw out virulently far-right horror stories of anti-Semitism and racism and anti-immigrant stuff and anti-refugee stuff and so on. So sadly, that's where we see a lot of those on the right getting involved in animal rights, is to corrupt it. That's the unfortunate thing. And I remember 15 years ago back in England, being involved in various discussion groups with people trying to combat then the infiltration of grassroots initiatives by the far right to use them for their own purposes. And it seems like they continue to do the same thing. So you are correct that it's those who are progressive, those on the left who are genuinely interested in seeing changes to the current system, because they see that kind of change is necessary. So I guess we've got to kind of focus our attention somewhere, and it needs to be there.
I just messaged Roger to say, Roger, how do we shut this down? And are we going to lose it? But I don't think he's picking up the message, so I don't know what happens now.
He sent
it's just one of those forever things.
He sent a text earlier. Obviously, the power cut is still.
I think he's without. He's off grid, I guess, at the moment. gone back to the.
Oh, I bet he'll be really, really sad, because I think he would have really, really enjoyed this conversation.
No, he
Had lots
would.
of you ask you
Roger,
about.
Absolutely. It's been a brilliant conversation, and Roger and I have always had really excellent discussions, in the past on many of these related issues and stuff. So yeah, it's a shame that he disappeared.
I know. So Michael was late. Michael, just to fill you in, little brief resume is Roger disappeared after about 10 minutes. Power cut, apparently, which has been amazing. Me and Nella probably panicked a little bit, thinking, oh my God, what we're going to do? How do we shut it down? We can't bring comments on. But I think we. And Brian's popped on and shown his bum very briefly, not much.
Yeah.
So that's the session. And he's sitting there going, "It's my dinner." Yeah.
I have a last question about the books.
Okay.
Where can people find them?
Okay, yeah, I apologize in advance for this one, but if you do go onto that thing called Amazon, then you can find them there at a really good price. They are sold at cost price only. I don't do this thing for money. Why would I do that? No, it's just about trying to share my vegan philosophy of kindness and compassion and love. So sadly, but annoyingly, sometimes we have to work with the things we have in this world, and Amazon is by far the most effective route I have to be able to share my books and share my
Damn
vision.
that Jeff Bezos. Damn him.
Yeah, I know. But they are there.
So efficient.
I've got a number of copies in my house. If anybody just turns up and knocks on my door, then I can give them that way as well. But Amazon's probably easier.
Should we give your address out, Richard? Should we?
Oh,
Let's not do
Go the
that.
Amazon route. They deliver all times of the day and night. Yeah.
And also in your in the Who Speaks the Earthlings, you've got some amazing writings in there, and it's a real mixture, isn't it? It's prose, it's poetry, but it's also some of your speeches that you've given, the collection of thoughts, some really, really interesting and powerful stuff there as well. I really recommend both of those.
Yeah, so kindly. Yeah, that's just like my gathering of my thoughts together over a few years of just watching the world and being out there and advocating and speaking in various places and seeing what was going on and trying to document some of the stuff that was happening. And I'll get around to that third book at some point.
Yeah, no, I'm sure you've got a third book in you somewhere, Richard.
It's in there. Yeah, it's in there. It's not coming out at all. Eventually, I'm sure. Yeah.
Oh, Paul said the viewership's going up. We're getting more viewers the longer it goes
The longer it goes on. So by this time tomorrow, cracking. Yeah. That'll be fine.
You guys feel free to carry on with that. I've got to just go and sort this little man
I
out.
think we'll have to try and shut it down and see if we can really shut it down.
I know. I suppose we can all leave.
We can't close the
I don't know what will
studio. We can just
happen.
leave. Yeah.
The studio might keep running,
The
so you
studio
might be able
will
to
just
just.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So when it finally powers back up in Rogerland.
So does anyone have any last questions for Richard before we go? Anything you'd like to know from Richard? It's been such a great conversation. I've learned so much because I'm always I'm really interested in politics, in terms of like party politics and stuff, but I'm always a little bit sometimes confused by the intricacies and details of it. And I know it's different in every country as well. So, but I've been really interested to learn how it goes and how it went for you with the party. Roger may be able to connect his computer to the internet via his phone using the mobile network instead of Wi-Fi and shut the show down that way. I think he said earlier on, Ronnie, that he tried on the phone, but only got 3G, I think he said.
Oh, that's never going to be enough, is it? No way.
I think that's what he said.
Pixelated
Yeah, so
horrible.
he might have tried. He might have already tried that. Camp the Animal Rights Show, Deb. Oh, bless Deb. So, any last thoughts? Any last comments?
I would simply say thank you so much for allowing me to do this and inviting me on to share these ideas and have this conversation. I've really, really enjoyed it. It's been really, really brilliant, really excellent conversation, I think, about some really important issues, and the comments that have been coming through, absolutely brilliant points that people are making. It's something that we know is, it's a really important part of our advocacy, because a lot of what, as we know, a lot of what happens to our non-human animal friends happens because it's legal. So it's the legislature that decides that, and that legislature is political. So politics matters to veganism. So for me, it's been a really, really interesting conversation. I've really enjoyed it. So thank you so much.
It was really interesting for us too. Actually, it was great, and we hope that if you are available in the future, we'll have the chance to meet again, and maybe with a slightly different topic, or we can expand on this one. Have a lot to talk about.
So much to say, isn't there? Yeah.
Thank you so much for doing this today. Roger says that if we leave the studio simultaneously, this should close the stream down.
So we've got to do it on the count of three. Yeah, I just want to say thank you to Rick as well. It's been such an amazing conversation, and it was an absolute honour and pleasure to have you on, and definitely I hope you will be able to come back as well.
Absolutely, brilliant. Thank you so much.
Thank you everyone for the comments and the questions. Unfortunately, we could not put them on the screen, but thank you. It was great, and there was a lot of really interesting conversations in the chat.
Oh, Michael says, no, I miss Brian's bump. Let me just see if I can remedy this, Michael. Bear with me. Brian. Bye. Bye. Hey. Bye. You coming up?
Is he going to?
I can hear him. I can't see him.
Around.
He's around. Bye.
Sound but no vision.
Just come and say bye. Come and say goodbye. Come on. Can you hear him? Come in. Come on. Say goodbye. Come and show your bum to Michael. Come on. Come in. Come on. He's looking at me like, what? You usually can't get him down. Can you, Nella? Really?
No, he's a diva.
It's the only way to
Sorry, Michael. I did try. Let Brian count down when you will leave. Thanks for a great discussion, Philip says. Thank you. Are you still on your lunch break, Philip? Good to have you here. So I think we're all going to try and leave at the same time. Should we do it after 3?
After 3. Yeah.
Are you ready?
Go for it.
3, 2, 1.